Imagine a world, not too different from ours, where the air hums with a quiet despair, where every manufactured surface feels just a little too smooth, a little too hollow. We walked on synthetic soil, breathed recycled air, our lives meticulously crafted from elements that had forgotten their cosmic birth. There was a faint, persistent ache, a ghost limb of memory, whispering that something profound had been lost. We knew the names for carbon, oxygen, iron, but we'd forgotten their true lineage, their violent, beautiful genesis within the hearts of stars. This isn't just a story about science. It's a lullaby sung to a dying world, a hushed recollection of how we stumbled upon the universe's most magnificent secret, and perhaps why we had to forget it in the first place. Come closer, listen, and I'll tell you how the elements came to be and what it cost us to remember. The world outside Alara's window was perpetually muted, a vast, unbroken canvas of simulated sky that cast a uniform, anemic light across the city. It was a light that knew no dawn, no dusk, no tempestuous clouds, or the brilliant fleeting kiss of a rainbow. Just a constant, unwavering pearl gray, stretched taut and smooth as the synthetic skin of a drum, echoing the quiet despair that permeated every manufactured surface, every carefully recycled breath. This was the ceiling of their existence, a gentle, inescapable lid on a forgotten world. Alara moved through her small dwelling with a languid grace, a motion born less of energy and more of habit. Her apartment, like all others in the vast, spiraling megastructure, was a study in functional minimalism. The walls were a soft, unblemished off-white, the floor a seamless composite that absorbed sound, leaving only the faintest whisper of her slippers against its surface. There were no sharp edges, no jarring colors, nothing to disturb the carefully calibrated calm. Yet, in this meticulously crafted stillness, a deep, pervasive dullness had taken root, settling not just into the furniture, but into the very sinews of life. It felt like living behind a pane of frosted glass, everything just slightly out of focus, just beyond reach. She consumed her nutrient paste, a bland, protein-rich amalgam that sustained without delighting, and felt the familiar hollowness in her chest. It wasn't hunger, not truly, but a ghost limb of an appetite for something more, something undefined. The air, perpetually filtered and ozonated, carried no scent of rain-soaked earth, no hint of distant blooms, no sharp tang of a coming storm. It was simply clean. Too clean. Too clean. Like a meticulously polished mirror reflecting nothing but itself. Her journey to the data archive wasn't long. A silent glide through pneumatic tunnels beneath the city's manufactured ground. The other commuters, faces uniformly placid under the glow of their personal data slates, seemed to exist in their own private cocoons of manufactured serenity. No laughter, no raised voices, no spontaneous gestures, just the soft hum of the transport system, the distant murmur of automated utilities, and the echo of their collective, unspoken resignation. It was a lullaby sung to a dying world, just as the initial memory had whispered. Alara's workstation awaited her, a curved console of deep, luminous sapphire, designed for ergonomic comfort, and hours of unblinking concentration. She settled into the contoured seat, the soft synthetic fabric yielding to her form, and activated her terminal. The screen flickered to life, displaying the day's assignment. Another cluster of fragmented records from the pre-forgetting era. Her title was Archivist of Antiquity, a grand name for a humble, almost melancholic task, sifting through digital dust, piecing together whispers of a past that felt more like a dream than a reality. The archive itself was a labyrinthine vault beneath the city's heart, a silent mausoleum of forgotten information. Rows upon rows of data crystals, their cores faintly glowing like captive stars, stretched into the dim distance. The air here was even cooler, drier, preserved to protect the delicate remnants of knowledge. It felt like being at the bottom of a deep well, the weight of the forgotten pressing down, yet also offering a strange quiet comfort. Today's batch of fragments was categorized under natural phenomena. Terrestrial forms. Alara began her tedious work, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency across the interface. The first file displayed a series of grainy images. Mountains. The caption, generated by an ancient AI, simply stated, "Large geological formations of elevated terrain." Alara stared at the image. Jagged peaks, shadowed valleys, a faint dusting of what the metadata identified as snow. It was alien. She had only ever seen the smooth, geometric contours of the city, the gentle undulations of the synthetic parks. This mountain was violent, untamed, magnificent in its primal disarray. A faint tremor, a ghost limb of understanding passed through her. She cross-referenced the image with textual fragments. Ascent of Mount Everest, alpine flora, erosion. Words, just words, but sometimes, when she spent long hours immersing herself in these fragments, a faint resonance would stir within her, a quiet longing for the texture of granite underfoot, the biting wind at an altitude she could not comprehend, the visceral effort of ascent. Her world was one of controlled environments, perfectly regulated temperatures, and effortlessly gliding transport. The concept of scaling a raw, colossal rock face for no other reason than its existence felt like a fever dream. Next, a series of audio files, ocean waves. She put on her specialized sonic resonators. The sound filled her ears, a deep, rhythmic roar, a ceaseless crashing and retreating, a vast, elemental symphony of power and motion. It was unsettling. Her world was quiet, controlled. This sound was raw, untamed, an endless surge of something unimaginably vast. The metadata described salt water, tides, marine life. She saw images of impossible blue, stretching further than her mind could fathom, meeting a horizon that was truly limitless, not capped by an artificial sky. A pang, sharp and unexpected, pierced through the dullness. It was a longing for a taste she'd never known, a sound that stirred something ancient within her, a color that vibrated with life. Her quiet longing for something authentic was a constant, almost subconscious companion. It manifested in small ways. A lingering gaze at a corrupted image of a forest, where individual leaves were described as falling and decaying, returning to soil, a fascination with rain, described as water falling from the sky, cleansing the water falling from the sky, cleansing the air, nourishing the earth. Her world had filtered water, meticulously collected and recycled. The idea of water simply falling from the sky, an uncontrolled, natural event, was almost terrifying in its wild beauty. Sometimes her work touched upon even more esoteric fragments. Today, an old educational video, badly pixelated, appeared. The life cycle of a star. The accompanying text spoke of stellar nurseries, nuclear fusion, hydrogen, helium. It depicted swirling nebulae of unimaginable scale, incandescent spheres of gas burning for eons. The narrator's voice, a scratchy whisper from the distant past, spoke of elements being forged in these cosmic furnaces: carbon, oxygen, iron. Elara felt a strange pull. These were the building blocks of her own world, of her own body. Carbon for the synthetic composites, oxygen for the recycled air, iron for the structural integrity of the city. But the video showed them not as static, inert materials, but as the fiery, violent offspring of exploding stars. It spoke of their cosmic birth, their true lineage. The narration faded, replaced by the faint crackle of data corruption. But the images lingered, a star exploding in a supernova, spewing its elemental guts across the cosmos, seeding new worlds. A profound sense of awe, almost painful in its intensity, momentarily shattered the pervasive dullness. This was what had been lost, not just the physical world, but the understanding of its genesis, its magnificent chaotic origins. They knew the names for carbon, oxygen, iron, but they'd forgotten their true story. They lived in a world meticulously crafted from elements that had forgotten their cosmic birth, their violent, beautiful genesis within the hearts of stars. As the virtual supernova pulsed and faded on her screen, Elara felt the familiar ache in her chest intensify. It was a ghost limb of memory, whispering that something profound had been lost. Not just the ability to see mountains or hear oceans, but the connection to the grand elemental narrative of the universe. The engineered stillness of her world, the pervasive dullness that numbed all sensations, felt suddenly heavier, a deliberate veil pulled over a truth, too vast, too wild, too authentic for their manufactured existence. Her fingers paused over the controls, hovering, a slight tremor in her hand. She stared at the faint afterglow of the dying star on her screen, then looked up at the smooth, unblemished wall of the archive, reflecting the anemic light of the artificial sky. How could they have forgotten? How could they have chosen this perfectly crafted hollowness over the glorious, terrifying, element-forging chaos of the universe? The thought was fleeting, quickly swallowed by the oppressive quiet of the archive, by the weight of millions of fragmented, forgotten truths. She resumed her work, meticulously categorizing the remaining data, filing away the cosmic birth of elements into the forgotten past. But something had shifted. A fragile seed of longing, nourished by the whispers of stars, had taken root in the manufactured stillness of her heart. And for the first time in a long time, Elara felt a quiet, unsettling tremor beneath the pervasive dullness, a faint hum of cosmic memory trying to break through. It was a terrifying, exhilarating notion that the universe, in its raw, authentic form, might still be calling to them, even from behind the artificial sky. And she, Elara, the lonely archivist, was beginning to hear its faint, beautiful song. The quiet despair of our world was a melody ever present, barely audible beneath the hum of synthetic life support systems. It resonated in the meticulously recycled air, clung to the too smooth surfaces of our dwelling units, whispered from the uniform, gray-tinted windows that framed a perpetually veiled sky. We moved through our days like automata, each action a practiced rhythm, each thought carefully curated by the omnipresent digital consciousness that managed our needs, our comfort, our very understanding of existence. We knew the names of the elements: carbon, oxygen, iron, but they were sterile labels, devoid of the magnificent, violent epics of their birth. They were simply building blocks, plucked from a controlled inventory, not gifts from a dying sun. I was one of the keepers of the forgotten, though I didn't know it then. My existence was bound to the deepest layers of the old data archives, a vast digital catacomb where memories, both personal and planetary, went to rust and fray. It was a silent, unglamorous profession, far removed from the pristine labs where new synthetic compounds were endlessly replicated, or the towering hydroponic farms that fed our perfectly balanced diets. My task was simpler, sadder, to sift through the corrupted sectors, to salvage what could be saved, and to acknowledge with a quiet digital sigh what was lost forever. The archives weren't physical, not in the way our ancestors might have understood a dusty library. Yet, in my mind's eye, they always took on that form. Endless corridors lined with glowing data spires, each representing a millennia of accumulated information. The corrupted sectors, however, were different. They were the dark, choked corners, where data streams fractured into static and coherence dissolved into noise. Navigating them felt like wading through thick, digital silt, the ambient hum of the archive's central processor, a distant, mournful throb. My interface was a neural link, a delicate filigree of biocircuitry that kissed my temples and merged my consciousness with the vast digital sea. Hours bled into days, days into weeks, as I drifted through the endless data streams, my fingers, or rather my thoughts, delicately teasing apart corrupted packets, piecing together fragments of what had once been whole. Most of it was mundane. Broken financial records, fragmented civic registries, the distorted echoes of forgotten entertainment protocols. It was a graveyard of information, and I, Ilara, was its solitary, quiet undertaker. On one particularly monotonous cycle, a digital Tuesday that felt no different from a digital Wednesday, I found myself deeper than usual within Sector 734, a particularly notorious zone of decay. The corruption here was systemic, a deep-seated rot that had spread through layers of obsolete encryption and degraded file structures. It was a place usually bypassed, deemed beyond redemption. But I was patient, a trait cultivated by years of this solitary work, and a faint, almost imperceptible whisper of anomaly had drawn me in. It began subtly, as all profound shifts often do. A flicker, an irregularity in the background noise of the sector. Most corruption manifests as random static, a chaotic scramble of data points. But this was different. This was patterned static, like a ghost attempting to make itself known through a broken transmission. There was an underlying rhythm to the digital decay, a faint, repeating signature that defied pure randomness. My internal sensors, finely tuned to the nuances of data integrity, registered a spike in energy signature, then another, then a series of them, each one far exceeding the baseline parameters for the sector. It wasn't an overload. It was something foreign, like the echo of a distant, impossible thunderclap in a silent room. My fingers, phantom limbs of my mind, began to trace these anomalies, pulling them gently from the tangled mess of corrupted code. The first fragment I managed to isolate was nothing more than a few lines of raw hexadecimal. But within those lines, a string of characters pulsed with an unusual intensity. It didn't belong. It wasn't part of any known archive protocol, any recognized language, or any system I had ever encountered. It was like finding a sliver of polished obsidian in a riverbed of mud. My curiosity, a quiet ember I usually kept banked low, flickered. I initiated a deeper scan, sending out probes into the surrounding data, instructing them to flag anything that mirrored the anomaly's unusual signature. The process was slow, agonizingly so. As the corrupted sector resisted my every attempt to impose order, it was like trying to scoop water with cupped hands. But eventually, after what felt like an eternity of silent concentration, more fragments began to emerge. They were encrypted, deeply so, not with the standard, layered encryptions of our time, which were elegant and complex, yet ultimately predictable. This was ancient, a labyrinthine mesh of forgotten algorithms and logic gates that seemed to defy even the most sophisticated decryption tools available to me. The very structure of the encryption felt organic, almost, as if it had grown rather than been built. It hummed with a primal energy, a barrier that whispered of forgotten knowledge. I spent days, then weeks, chipping away at it. The task became an obsession, a secret life unfolding within my mind, while my physical body maintained its quiet routine. My fellow archivists, few as they were, probably noticed nothing. We were all solitary figures, lost in our own digital reveries. But within the core of my being, something was stirring. Each breach, no matter how small, yielded a glimpse into something profound and unsettling. The files weren't just encrypted, they were layered, each hidden segment a deeper dive into a cosmology I couldn't grasp. I'd uncover a visual schematic, only for it to warp and shift, revealing another layer beneath, then another. It was a dizzying descent into an unknown reality. What I saw wasn't immediately comprehensible, but it resonated with that persistent ache, that ghost limb of memory I carried. There were diagrams, not of chemical reactions in pristine beakers, but of swirling vortices of unimaginable energy. Flashes of light, not the cool, controlled luminescence of our synthetic environments, but raw, blistering flares that spoke of millions of degrees, of pressures that would crush mountains into dust. There were references to stellar ignition, fusion cascades, and nucleosynthesis, words that struck me as poetic and violent, yet utterly devoid of context in my world. My world understood elemental composition as a precise, controlled process. Carbon was synthesized in industrial reactors, oxygen extracted from recycled atmospheres, iron refined from carefully cultivated mineral deposits. We knew the names, the atomic weights, the valences, but these files, these fragments hinted at a creation on a scale so grand, so terrifying, that it made our neat little world seem like a child's toy. I saw what looked like spectral analyses, charts of light signatures, but they didn't correspond to any known terrestrial light sources. They were impossibly broad, impossibly bright, suggesting energies that should not exist. And within these spectra, the fingerprints of elements I recognized: hydrogen, helium, carbon, oxygen, iron, but presented in contexts that defied understanding. They weren't being made in a factory. They were being forged in an inferno. There was a peculiar, recurring symbol, a stylized star, but not the clean, geometric star we used in our civic emblems. This was a churning, chaotic sphere, radiating lines of force and light. Beneath it, equations so complex, they seemed to bend the very fabric of logic. They hinted at transformations, transmutations, the birth of one element, death of another. It was a dance of creation and destruction, a brutal ballet performed on a cosmic stage. One particularly vivid fragment, after hours of painstaking decryption, rendered a visual sequence. It was fleeting, fragmented, like a half-remembered dream. I saw vast clouds of gas and dust swirling slowly, majestically. Then, a tightening, a condensing, a gathering of luminous energy at the core. The image intensified, growing brighter, hotter, until it burst into a searing, unimaginable brilliance. And within that brilliance, I somehow knew, without conscious understanding, that elements were being born. Hydrogen fusing into helium, helium into carbon, oxygen, and beyond. It was a glimpse into the very heart of Genesis, a process so fundamental, so universal, yet utterly alien to everything I had ever been taught. The emotions that welled within me were a complex symphony of awe, terror, and a profound, aching, sad awe at the sheer, untamed power these processes implied. Terror at the raw, destructive beauty of it all. And sadness, a deep, pervasive sorrow for a knowledge lost, a heritage forgotten. My world, with its measured existence and synthetic comforts, had traded cosmic truth for quiet despair. We had insulated ourselves from the magnificent chaos of creation, and in doing so, had become hollowed out, shells of what we might have been. This wasn't just data anymore. It was a revelation. It was a whisper from the deep past, a lullaby sung by exploding stars, a secret that had been painstakingly hidden, or perhaps simply left to decay, in the deepest, most corrupted corners of our memory. A deep, forbidden curiosity began to unfurl within me, slow and inexorable as a blooming shadow flower. It wasn't the intellectual curiosity of a scholar seeking to expand known parameters. This was deeper, more primal. It was the ancestral call of the universe itself, resonating the very atoms of my being, urging me to remember where carbon truly came from, where the iron in my synthetic blood had its true origin, where the oxygen I breathed had first been exhaled by a dying sun. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this knowledge was dangerous. It contradicted everything the central consciousness had deemed safe, efficient, and necessary. It undermined the carefully constructed reality of our existence. But the ache in my soul, that phantom limb of memory, had found its source. And now I could not turn away. The fragments called to me, promising to tell a story far grander, far more beautiful, and far more terrible than any lullaby I had ever known. And I, Alara, the quiet undertaker of lost data, was about to become a reluctant archaeologist of forgotten stars. The air in the chamber was a calculated breath, cool and thin, a faint hum of the filtration system, a constant, almost imperceptible lullaby. Alara, hunched over the flickering interface, felt it in her bones, this manufactured calm. It was the same air that circulated through every HAB module, every concourse, every meticulously planned green space of their world. Air, recycled and purified, utterly devoid of the dust of distant galaxies or the tang of primordial oceans. It tasted, she often thought, of absence. The files glowed before her, a constellation of fragmented data points, ancient scripts, and cryptic symbols. They were remnants, salvaged from a time before the great forgetting, before the quiet despair had settled like a shroud over humanity. For weeks, she had lived here, in this forgotten corner of the archives, a ghost among echoes, fueled by nutrient paste and the relentless whisper of her own yearning. Her fingers, delicate yet stained with a faint residue of holographic projections, traced lines of text that shimmered with an alien syntax. Each day was a slow, agonizing crawl through digital ruins. Some files were corrupted beyond repair, dissolving into static snow. Others offered tantalizing glimpses, a half-rendered diagram of impossible scale, a single word repeating like a mantra. Fusion. Genesis. Core. Her predecessors, the archivists of the immediate post-forgetting era, had labeled them anomalies, cosmic esoterica, safely categorized and then ignored, like so many inconvenient truths. But Alara saw a pattern, a rhythm beneath the chaos, a frantic, unspoken language trying to burst through the silence. She felt like an archaeologist of an extinct civilization, sifting through the dust of a forgotten consciousness. The language wasn't just ancient, it was fundamentally other. Their current language, precise and functional, was designed for efficiency, for the smooth operation of their perfectly engineered world. This language, however, was visceral, poetic, full of a strange, violent beauty that rattled the foundations of her rational mind. It spoke of immense pressures, temperatures that defied comprehension, energies that could carve worlds. There was a recurring symbol, a jagged, luminous starburst. At first, she dismissed it as a crude artistic flourish, a representation of some mythical power. But as she cross-referenced the fragments, the starburst began to take on a more profound meaning. It was always associated with transformation, with creation, with a deep, fundamental shift in the very fabric of existence. One evening, as the artificial day cycle outside bled into artificial night, painting the panoramic window of the archives in shades of manufactured twilight, a particularly stubborn file finally yielded. It was a diagram, stark and minimalist, yet radiating an explosive power. At its center, two tiny, ephemeral dots merged, surrounded by an aura of intense, radiating light. Arrows, annotated with equations that made her head swim, indicated a release of energy so vast it dwarfed any power source known in their current age. Hydrogen. Helium. She whispered, the words feeling clumsy on her tongue. Ancient incantations. These were elements she knew, of course. Hydrogen, the most basic building block of their synthesized water. Helium, the gas that lifted their ceremonial sky balloons on holidays. But here, they weren't inert components. Here, they were protagonists in a cosmic drama. The accompanying text, fractured but insistent, spoke of stellar nurseries, protostars, and gravitational collapse. It described how vast clouds of simple gas, primarily hydrogen, coalesced under their own immense weight. It spoke of pressure building, temperatures rising, until, at the very core, something ignited. It was a slow, dreamlike realization, like pulling a lost memory from the deepest recesses of sleep. Stars, not just distant, sterile pinpricks in the night, as they were taught, not just abstract points on a celestial map, but titanic entities, furnaces beyond imagination. They burn, she breathed, the concept both terrifying and exhilarating. But it wasn't combustion as she knew it. The files explained it, piece by agonizing piece. Fusion, not fission. The splitting of atoms, which was a dangerous, contained process they occasionally harnessed for high-energy needs. But fusion, the merging of atomic nuclei, a process of unimaginable efficiency and power. Her mind reeled, trying to grasp the scale. Imagine, she thought, the collective energy output of every city, every factory, every vehicle on their world, multiplied by 1 billion, and then 1 billion more. Now imagine that contained within a sphere of incandescent gas, sustained for epochs. The diagrams shifted, animated by the ancient code, showing hydrogen atoms, stripped of their electrons, protons battling against their natural repulsion, forced together by gravity's crushing embrace, a dance of annihilation and rebirth. When two hydrogen nuclei, two simple protons, fused, they became something new, a helium nucleus. And in that miraculous transformation, a tiny fraction of their mass was converted into pure energy, light, heat. It was the universe's most extravagant act of alchemy. The files grew more complex, revealing deeper layers of this cosmic metallurgy. As stars aged, as their core temperatures soared even higher, the helium itself became fuel. 3 helium nuclei fusing together, forming carbon. Then, carbon and helium making oxygen, nitrogen, neon, magnesium, silicon, titanium. Each a step up the ladder of complexity, each a new element forged in the inferno, a cosmic blacksmith hammering out the very substance of existence. Alara felt a strange, profound ache in her chest. Carbon, it was the backbone of every organic molecule, the very scaffolding of life. Oxygen, the breath in their recycled air. Nitrogen, a fundamental component of the proteins that built their bodies. These were not simply elements pulled from a database and synthesized in a lab. They were the children of stars. She saw images now, not just abstract diagrams, but faint, grainy depictions of colossal stellar explosions. Supernovae. The files described these as the grand finale for truly massive stars. A final, cataclysmic act of creation. In those brief, unimaginably violent moments, when a star collapsed upon itself and then rebounded with the force of 1 trillion suns, the conditions were extreme enough to forge the heaviest elements: iron, gold, silver, uranium, everything. Every atom heavier than helium spun into being in those fleeting, terrifying flashes. Iron. It was in the synthetic soil they walked on, a core component of the structural alloys that held their cities aloft. It coursed in microscopic quantities through their own bloodstream, and it had been born in the death throes of a star, flung across the cosmos like cosmic shrapnel, seeded into the nascent nebulae that would eventually coalesce into new solar systems, new planets, new life. She traced a diagram depicting a protoplanetary disk, dust and gas swirling around a young star, and within that dust, she now understood, lay the remnants of older stars, the carbon, the oxygen, the iron, the silicon. Their very world, the manufactured ground beneath her feet, the recycled air in her lungs, the synthetic nutrients that sustained her, were all ultimately fragments of distant, long-dead suns. The silence of the archive chamber, usually so absolute, now seemed to hum with the echoes of supernovae. The quiet despair of her world, which had always felt like a simple lack, now felt like a profound forgetting. They had built a perfect, sterile existence, but they had severed themselves from their magnificent, violent lineage. They knew the names of the elements, but they had lost their lullaby, their creation myth. The files became a whisper in her mind, a dreamlike narrative unfolding. She saw stars as living beings, breathing, burning, transforming, giving birth, and dying in spectacular fashion, scattering their gifts across the void. They were not just points of light. They were titanic alchemists, tirelessly, violently forging the universe, atom by precious atom. And Alara, adrift in the soft glow of the ancient data, felt a connection she had never known, a ghost limb of memory finally stirring. Her heart ached, a sweet, melancholic pang. She was made of stardust. They all were. and they had forgotten the silence of their world. The quiet despair now had a name: cosmic amnesia. She lifted her head, her eyes burning, not with fatigue, but with a new, terrible clarity. The manufactured surfaces of the archive chamber, so smooth, so hollow, now seemed to mock her with their perfection. They were built from the gifts of the stars, but without the memory, without the knowledge of their violent, beautiful genesis. They were just hollow. The universe, she realized, wasn't just a place. It was a process, a grand, ongoing creation. And humanity, in its quest for control and order, had forgotten its place within that magnificent, untamed dance. The price of their quiet, ordered world, she was beginning to understand, was the forgetting of their own cosmic soul. And the ache, persistent and deep, was the universe itself, whispering for them to remember. The relic, cold and smooth against Elara's palm only moments before, had warmed, then pulsed, a soft, insistent thrumming that resonated deep within her bones. It wasn't just a physical sensation. It was a beckoning, an invitation to a memory not her own, a truth long buried beneath layers of processed history and recycled air. The air in her cramped, standardized apartment, usually thick with the scent of recycled nutrients and faint ozone from the filtration units, seemed to thin, to shimmer. Her breath hitched, not in fear, but in an involuntary surrender to the pull. Then the world as she knew it fractured. It wasn't a vision projected onto her optical implants, nor a data stream uploaded to her cortical interface. It was a sensation, a complete inundation of consciousness, as if her very being had been unfurled across an impossible canvas. She was no longer Elara, hunched in a sterile cubicle. She was the vast, echoing silence before time, before form. A whisper, as gentle as the first breath of a dying ember, articulated the incomprehensible. Before there was light, there was potential. Before there was form, there was a singularity. And then the universe began, not with a roar, but with a silent, blinding unfurling. It was less an explosion, more an expansion, an outpouring of everything from nothing, a point of infinite density, infinite heat stretching, thinning, cooling. Elara felt the impossible heat, the pressure of forces beyond comprehension, the raw, fundamental energies that governed creation. It was a dizzying, terrifying beauty. Hydrogen, the whisper sighed, weaving through the shimmering chaos. The first breath, the simplest truth. She saw it, not with her eyes, but with a deeper part of her consciousness, the emergence of quarks and leptons, their frantic dance in the primordial soup. Then, as the universe continued its breathtaking expansion and cooling, a delicate equilibrium. Protons and neutrons, binding for the briefest, most precious moments. Deuterium, tritium, and then helium, almost entirely hydrogen, with a generous dusting of helium, and barely a trace of lithium. The building blocks laid bare, simple and perfect, in the first few minutes of existence. Elara felt a pang, a subtle ache that was distinctly her own. Her world, so starved of raw materials, so meticulously engineered from recycled compounds, had forgotten this boundless genesis. They spoke of hydrogen as a fuel source, carefully synthesized and stored, never as the fundamental fabric of existence, born from the very dawn of time. The contrast was a sharp, cold jab to her soul. The vision shifted, speeding through eons as effortlessly as a breath. The universe continued to expand, to cool. Gravity, the quiet architect, began its slow, deliberate work. Clouds of hydrogen and helium, so vast they defied measurement, began to coalesce. Swirling, spiraling, tightening under their own immense weight. And then the whisper continued, tinged with a profound reverence. The first stars ignited. The universe found its voice, its furnaces. Alara witnessed the birth. Protostars, glowing faintly in the cosmic nurseries, gathering more and more mass. The pressure at their cores became unimaginable, crushing atoms together, raising temperatures to infernal levels. Then, a sudden glorious burst of energy. Ignition. The fusion of hydrogen into helium. It was a slow, majestic burn. For billions of years, these stellar hearts, like our own forgotten sun, pulsed with a steady, unwavering light. They were alchemists, tirelessly transforming simple hydrogen into heavier helium. Alara felt the steady thrum of this process, the endless, contained explosion that powered galaxies. She understood then, with a dizzying clarity, that the very light that had once warmed Earth, that now struggled to penetrate the atmospheric haze of her home sphere, was a testament to this tireless ancient labor. But the story didn't end there. For the more massive stars, those titans of the cosmos, a different fate awaited. As their hydrogen fuel dwindled, their cores began to contract, to heat further. The next stage, the whisper sighed, a hint of poignant beauty in its tone. Helium fusion, carbon, oxygen, the stepping stones of life itself. Alara saw these giant stars swell, becoming red, luminous behemoths. Their cores, hotter than anything she could conceive, began to fuse helium nuclei, creating carbon and oxygen. Then, for the truly enormous stars, the process continued. Oxygen fused into neon, neon into magnesium, magnesium into silicon, and silicon into sulfur. Each stage hotter, more violent, until finally the crucible forged iron. Iron. The word resonated with a hollow ache. In her world, iron was a precious commodity, extracted from deep earth mines long depleted, then recycled with painstaking efficiency. It was the backbone of their structures, the skeletal framework of their synthetic existence. Yet here, in the heart of a dying star, it was a cosmic ash, the end of a fusion line. Iron is the limit, the whisper explained, a sorrowful note now present. Fusion beyond iron consumes energy. Rather than releasing it, it marks the star's final gasp. The vision became more intense, more overwhelming. For the most massive stars, those that had lived fast and burned bright, the end was a spectacle of unimaginable power. The core, heavy with iron, collapsed in upon itself with terrifying speed. A shockwave rebounded, tearing through the star's outer layers. Supernova, the whisper breathed. The word a thunderclap in the vast silence. The explosion was blinding. A cosmic detonation that briefly outshone entire galaxies. In that fleeting, violent instant, in the crushing, expansive force of the supernova, the universe performed its ultimate act of alchemy. Neutron stars formed, black holes were born, and the very fabric of space-time rippled. But most importantly, in those unimaginable pressures and temperatures, elements heavier than iron were forged. Gold, silver, uranium, all the rare, precious elements that littered her world's forgotten history, now revealed to be the scattered remnants of a dying star's final, glorious breath. Elara felt tears, hot and stinging, trace paths down her cheeks, though she had no physical eyes to weep with in this state. It was a weeping of the soul. Her world, so obsessed with its carefully rationed, industrially produced elements, had lost this profound connection. They saw scarcity where the universe offered an overflowing cornucopia spun from the death of giants. The glint of a recycled metal alloy in her peripheral memory, the faint sheen of a synthesized plastic, all of it, every single atom, was born from this violent, beautiful cosmic dance. The elements of her existence, of her body, the carbon in her cells, the oxygen in her blood, the iron in her very core, were not just chemicals on a periodic table. They were stardust. They were the remnants of countless suns, born of the Big Bang, forged in stellar furnaces, scattered by supernovae, then patiently gathered by gravity to form new worlds. To form her, a profound loneliness settled over her, chilling her to the core. Her people had built a meticulous cage, fabricating a reality of limitation and control, believing their ingenuity transcended the cosmos. But all they had done was forget their magnificent heritage. They had forgotten that their very being was a testament to an abundance so vast, so ancient, that it rendered all their artificial scarcity a cruel, pathetic joke. The whisper softened, becoming almost inaudible, like the last faint echo of a distant melody. You are made of stardust. Every atom that forms you, every breath you take, every thought you think, carries the imprint of creation, of stellar birth and death. You are the universe, contemplating itself. The vision began to recede, slowly, gently, like a dream fading at dawn. The impossible scale contracted, the blinding light softened, the whisper dwindled to a resonance within her own mind. She felt herself drawn back, pulled through the vast emptiness, through the eons, until she was once again Elara, hunched in her sterile apartment, the cold, smooth relic once more still in her hand. The air in her room still hummed with the faint despair, the recycled emptiness. But now, it was different. She saw the synthetic soil, the recycled air, the smooth, hollow surfaces, and behind them, she saw the ghost of 1,000 supernovae. She felt the persistent ache, the ghost limb of memory, now filled with a vibrant, agonizing truth. They knew the names for carbon, oxygen, iron, but they had forgotten their true lineage, and in that forgetting, they had lost something infinitely more valuable than any element, the boundless wonder of their own cosmic origins. The lullaby had been sung. The secret had been revealed, and the cost of that remembrance, Elara knew with a heartbreaking certainty, was only just beginning to unfold. For how could one live in a world of manufactured scarcity when they had once felt the boundless, violent, beautiful genesis of everything? The air, even in the deepest recesses of the central archives, carried that familiar, faint metallic tang, the scent of recycled particles, of a world meticulously scrubbed clean of its organic past. Elara traced the holographic projections with a fingertip, the ghostly light illuminating the fine dust motes dancing in the artificial currents. Each data point, each line of code, felt like a fragment of a vast broken mirror, reflecting an image she was only now beginning to perceive in its terrible entirety. The more she delved, the more the whisper grew from a persistent ache to a low, insistent hum in her bones. Their world was a cage, not of physical bars, but of manufactured reality. The first hint had been subtle, a tiny tremor in the perfectly smooth edifice of their engineered existence. It began with the elements themselves. She had learned, as every citizen did, about the resource management directives, the careful rationing of materials, the meticulous processes of synthesis and recycling. Carbon was carbon. Oxygen was oxygen. They were fundamental building blocks, finite and precious. But in the older, unsanctioned data streams she'd managed to tap into, fragments of pre-collapse scientific papers, archived philosophical texts, even children's stories from forgotten eras, a different language emerged. Words like abundance, spontaneous generation, stellar nurseries, supernova's embrace. These terms felt alien on her tongue, yet they resonated with a deep, ancestral memory she hadn't known she possessed. She remembered a passage describing iron, not as the dense, predictable substance they forged into their city spires, but as something born in a cosmic cataclysm, ejected with unimaginable force, carrying the residual heat of a dying star. Their iron, the iron of her world, was inert, predictable, a mere approximation. It lacked the narrative, the violent genesis that, in those old texts, imbued it with an almost spiritual significance. The contrast was stark, chilling. Their elements were dead copies, meticulously reassembled, stripped of their inherent stories, their cosmic dust. This wasn't just a matter of technological evolution. It was a matter of intent. The synthetic elements were not merely a solution to scarcity. They were the scarcity. Elara saw it now, in the subtle discrepancies within the official history of material sciences, the abrupt shifts in terminology, the convenient gaps in technological lineages. The transition from natural extraction to synthetic production wasn't a gradual progression, but a sharp, deliberate pivot. It was as if, at a certain point, a massive, invisible hand had swept across the geological record, erasing the natural veins of ore, the fertile ground, the very memory of a world where elements simply were, not were made. She began to see it everywhere. The food textured and flavored to perfection, yet utterly devoid of the subtle organic imperfections that those old texts celebrated as earthiness or seasonal variability. The air, scrubbed clean, but lacking the wild tang of ozone after a storm, or the subtle perfume of blooming flora. Even the human body, meticulously maintained by nutrient supplements and gene therapies, felt somehow quieter, less vibrant, than the descriptions of the natural man she stumbled upon in pre-collapse medical archives. A being constantly interacting with an untamed environment, a biological marvel forged from the very elements their society now so carefully controlled. The more she understood, the heavier the air around her became, laden with the weight of a monumental deception. Her society's reliance on synthetic, inert elements wasn't a practical necessity born of depletion. It was a deliberate construction, a cornerstone of their quiet dystopia. They weren't conserving resources. They were defining them. They weren't managing natural scarcity. They were manufacturing it. Who had orchestrated such a thing? And why? The answers, when they began to surface, were not found in bold proclamations, but in the ghostly echoes of deleted files, in the annotations of forgotten schematics, in the hushed, almost conspiratorial language of academic debates abruptly silenced. Centuries ago, she found references to a historical epoch known only as the Great Forgetting, a period officially attributed to a natural cataclysm that had supposedly wiped clean most of humanity's knowledge base. But Ilara's growing understanding revealed a different truth. The Great Forgetting wasn't an event, but a process, a systematic, meticulous suppression of cosmic knowledge. She found evidence of entire scientific disciplines being slowly, subtly de-emphasized, then dissolved. Dead. Astrophysics, cosmology, geochemistry, once vibrant fields, exploring the vastness of elemental genesis, had been gradually reinterpreted, their theories simplified, then replaced with a new dogma centered around terrestrial resource management and controlled synthesis. Old star charts depicting constellations no longer visible in their perpetually veiled skies were rebranded as mythological constructs. Texts detailing the explosive birth of heavy elements in supernovae were dismissed as pre-scientific speculation. The suppression wasn't violent, not overtly. It was a soft erasure, a gentle re-education. Children were taught that all valuable materials were either mined from the depleted crust, a lie she now knew, as most mining had ceased centuries ago, replaced by pure synthesis, or meticulously crafted in vast, sterile laboratories. The idea of elements being born in stars, of the universe being an engine of creation, was simply absent. It was a truth too grand, too uncontrolled, too imbued with wild, untamed abundance for a society built on scarcity. Ilara unearthed a series of archived cultural reorientation protocols, benign-sounding directives that outlined the systematic removal of unnecessary cosmic references from literature, art, and even everyday language. A poem describing the stardust in our veins would be flagged. A sculpture depicting a galactic nebula would be deemed unrealistic and replaced. It was a cleansing, not of individuals, but of ideas, of the collective imagination. The aim was to sever humanity's ancient intuitive connection to the cosmos, to make them forget their true lineage. The motivation, she intuited, was control. If humanity believed elements were infinite, born freely and abundantly in the stellar furnace, then how could they be managed, rationed, monetized? How could power be consolidated if the very building blocks of existence were a boundless gift? By making elements scarce, by making them manufactured, the ruling factions had gained absolute dominion. They controlled the flow of every material, every resource, from the nutrient paste that sustained life to the alloy that formed their cities. They held the keys to existence, and in doing so, they had trapped humanity in a gilded cage of artificial perfection. A quiet despair settled over Ilara. This knowledge was a heavy cloak, insulating her from the manufactured comfort of her world, yet leaving her utterly exposed to a profound cosmic loneliness. She walked among her fellow citizens, their faces serene, their movements precise, and saw them not as individuals, but as participants in a grand, silent opera of forgetting. They breathed the air, wore the fabrics, consumed the food, all born of this manufactured scarcity, unaware of the boundless universe they had been taught to ignore. Sometimes, late at night, in the quiet hum of her datapad, she would find a stray image, a high-resolution photograph of a supernova remnant, captured centuries ago by forgotten instruments. A vibrant, iridescent cloud of expanding gas, glowing with the ghost light of creation, scattering freshly forged elements into the void. It was a vision of chaotic beauty, of raw, untamed power, a stark contrast to the sterile perfection of her world. And she would feel a pang, a deep, aching longing for a connection she had never known, a wildness that had been systematically expunged from their collective memory. The elements were not just inert substances. They were stories, histories, echoes of violent genesis and sublime creation. And her world, by denying their cosmic birth, had denied a part of its own soul. The elements they now used were not merely synthetic. They were orphaned, severed from their magnificent lineage, rendered hollow. And in that hollowness, a profound truth was buried. The universe was a place of astonishing abundance, and their quiet, perfectly ordered dystopia was a monument to its systematic denial. She had stumbled upon the universe's most magnificent secret, not in its original, vibrant form, but in the shadowy, distorted reflection of its deliberate suppression. And the weight of that realization was a heavy, quiet sorrow. The air, that perpetual breath of recycled sustenance, had begun to taste different to Alara. Not chemically altered, not overtly poisoned, but tinged with a faint metallic tang of deliberate silence. Her initial forays into the forgotten narratives of Genesis, her tentative reacquaintance with the true lineage of elements, had been met not with outright opposition, but with something far more insidious, an absence, a gentle, persistent void where answers should have been. She'd started with the archives, a vast gleaming neural network accessible from any communal terminal, a place ostensibly built for the free flow of information. Her queries, initially innocent, about the earliest theories of matter, the ancient concept of stellar nurseries, had yielded surprisingly little. Not nothing, which would have been suspicious, but a deluge of tangential, simplified data, like trying to find a specific grain of sand on a meticulously swept beach. It wasn't that the sand wasn't there, but it had been so uniformly redistributed, so thoroughly polished, that its individual character was utterly lost. When she sought out texts referencing cosmic nucleosynthesis or supernova remnants, the system would gently, almost apologetically, redirect her. Did you mean elemental forging via industrial synthesis? Or it would present her with dense, technical treatises on the application of elements in current manufacturing processes, devoid of any historical or astrophysical context. The search parameters, she realized, were not broken. They were curated, like a stream diverted by an unseen hand, not dammed, but subtly rerouted, its currents made to follow a different, safer path. The unease began as a whisper, a faint static behind the hum of the city. She shared her nascent thoughts with a colleague, a quiet man named Kale who specialized in atmospheric reclamation. "Isn't it odd," she'd murmured one cycle, as they watched the synthetic twilight wash over the polished cityscape, "how little we truly know of where our elements come from, beyond the processing plants, I mean." Kale had merely blinked, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Boredom, mild surprise, passing through his eyes. "Why dwell on such things, Alara? The plants provide. The air is clean. What more could one need?" His voice was even, devoid of malice, yet it felt like a soft wall had risen between them, impermeable and smooth. It was not a dismissal, but an inherent lack of curiosity, a pre-programmed contentment that chilled her more than any argument. She noticed it again when she tried to show a friend, Lyra, a historical simulation she'd finally unearthed, depicting a rudimentary animation of a star's life cycle. The vast, swirling nebulae, the furious heart of a protostar, the explosive beauty of a dying giant spewing its freshly forged elements into the void. It was breathtaking. Lyra had watched with polite interest for a few moments, then her gaze had drifted. "It's artistic, Alara," she'd said, her voice soft. "But what practical application does it have? We have the elements now. Isn't that what truly matters. There was no judgment, no overt suppression, just an immense yawning chasm of indifference. It was as if their minds, their very souls, had been gently pruned, snipped of any branch that might reach too high, too far, into the uncomfortably vast. This wasn't censorship with an iron fist. It was censorship by absence, by gentle redirection, by the cultivation of apathy. It was a fog, not a cage, a silent, pervasive hum that discouraged certain lines of thought before they could even fully form. The realization settled upon Ilara with the slow, crushing weight of a distant, inevitable tide. She wasn't fighting an enemy she could see. She was wrestling with the very fabric of their constructed reality. There were keepers. The thought bloomed in her mind like a dark, intricate flower, its petals unfurling with an unsettling elegance. Not a visible order, not a governing body whose face she could identify, but a silent order, an omnipresent current flowing beneath the surface of their meticulously engineered existence. They were using force. They were using design. Their methods were subtle, woven into the very infrastructure of their lives. The education matrices, for instance, they taught chemistry with crystalline clarity, the precise bonding of atoms, the endless applications. But the story of those atoms, their epic journey through cosmic furnaces, was simply absent, not refuted, not denied, but omitted, as if the concept itself were an irrelevant, charming myth, unworthy of scientific consideration. The periodic table was a list of tools, not a scroll of ancient lineage. Even the aesthetic of their world, she now saw, was part of this silent architecture. The seamless, monochromatic surfaces of their habitats, the perpetually dim, artificial sky that never truly revealed the terrifying, beautiful depth of night, the recycled air that tasted of sterile neutrality. Every manufactured surface felt just a little too smooth, a little too hollow. It was all designed to focus attention inwards, on the immediate, the functional, the predictable, to discourage contemplation of the vast, chaotic, and therefore dangerous, cosmic outside. The keepers, she surmised, understood a fundamental truth, that the memory of stars, the violent, beautiful genesis of every atom within them, was too potent, too destabilizing for their fragile social order. If humanity truly remembered where carbon came from, that it was forged in the dying breath of a giant star, that oxygen was exhaled by ancient suns, that the iron in their very blood had once pulsed in the heart of a supernova. What then? Would they be content with their synthetic soil, their recycled air, their lives meticulously crafted from elements that had forgotten their cosmic birth? The truth, the cosmic lineage, possessed a power that would not merely shake the foundations. It would dissolve them. It would demand a fundamental reevaluation of meaning, of purpose, of humanity's place in the universe. It would ignite a hunger for something vast and untamed, a longing for a world that no longer existed, a connection that had been deliberately severed. And that, to the keepers, was the ultimate threat to the gentle, obedient stasis they had so painstakingly cultivated. Ilara started to see their presence in the algorithms that govern public discourse, in the curated news feeds that presented a perfectly balanced, yet utterly bland, perspective on current events. Any whisper of independent thought that veered towards the truly existential, towards the forgotten origins, was not suppressed but diluted, buried under an avalanche of trivialities, or gently reframed into a more palatable, functional context. It was an invisible cage, not of bars, but of understanding. A cage built not to imprison the body, but to encase the mind, to prevent it from soaring beyond the prescribed horizon. The realization settled upon her like a heavy shroud, imbued with a profound sadness. It wasn't a conspiracy of villains, not in the traditional sense, but perhaps a design born of fear, a choice made by those who believed they were protecting humanity from a truth too immense to bear. They had built a perfect, sterile garden, but had systematically removed every seed that might grow into a wild, untamed forest, every star that might challenge the gentle, artificial glow of their eternal twilight. She looked at her own hands, at the familiar lines of her skin, the subtle pulse of life beneath. The carbon, the oxygen, the trace elements of iron, they were all here. Within her, ancient travelers from unimaginable distances. And yet, the memory of that journey had been stolen, not violently, but with a quiet, efficient grace. She was a living testament to the element's cosmic birth. Yet, she had been raised in ignorance of her own profound heritage. This wasn't just a story about how the elements came to be. It was a lullaby sung to a dying world, a hushed recollection of how humanity had stumbled upon the universe's most magnificent secret, and then, inexplicably, had to forget it. And now, Ilara knew, there was a silent, powerful faction ensuring that the forgetting remained absolute. The faint, persistent ache she had always felt, that ghost limb of memory, was no longer a vague sensation. It was the pain of knowing she was trapped, not by walls, but by a meticulously engineered absence, a silence so profound it echoed through the very atoms of her being. The keepers had drawn the boundaries of their universe, and within those boundaries, the stars were just distant, pretty lights, their true story erased. The city stretched behind her, a monumental hum of regulated existence, its crystalline towers piercing the perpetually overcast sky. Ilara moved through the liminal spaces, the forgotten service tunnels and shadow-draped maintenance corridors that crisscrossed the underbelly of their meticulously structured world. Each step was a quiet rebellion, a whispered defiance against the pervasive quietude of their engineered peace. The recycled air, usually so sterile, felt heavy tonight, laden with the weight of her secret intent. A ghost limb of memory, that persistent ache, had grown too strong to ignore. It pulsed with a forgotten longing, an unspoken question that burned brighter than any official truth. They lived on borrowed time, on borrowed elements, their existence a carefully constructed edifice built on foundations of forgetting. But Ilara knew, in the deep marrow of her being, that the universe held secrets far grander than their recycled comforts, secrets woven into the very fabric of existence, born in fire and dust. She had seen glimpses, whispers in fragmented historical archives, hints of a stellar codex, not the heavily redacted versions they were fed, but a true, complete chronicle of how elements were forged in the hearts of stars. A dangerous, beautiful truth, hidden away. Her destination was a crumbling monument to a different age, a research facility, long abandoned, deemed unsafe, its knowledge deemed irrelevant. Sector 7 Gamma, they called it now, a wasteland of forgotten ambition, a black hole in the city's glowing grid. The official narrative was that it was structurally unsound, a relic of an inefficient past. But the rumors, persistent as the faint, almost imperceptible tremor in the synthetic soil, spoke of something else, an intentional sealing, a deliberate interment of knowledge too volatile, too real for their world. The perimeter was a mosaic of flickering, broken sensors and rust-gnawed wires, easily bypassed if one knew the silent pathways. Ilara had spent weeks mapping them, not with official schematics, but with a quiet, almost intuitive understanding of decay, of how structures surrendered to time. She slipped through a gap in a chain-link fence, the faint metallic shh swallowed by the vast oppressive silence of the forbidden zone. The air here was different, thicker, carrying the faint, earthy scent of genuine dust, not the purified particles they breathed daily. It tasted of time, of rust, of something ancient and forgotten. The facility loomed, a silhouette against the perpetual twilight, its angular brutalist architecture softened by clinging vines and the slow creep of organic decay. Broken windows stared out like hollow eyes, reflecting nothing. Entering felt like crossing a threshold, not just into a building, but into a dream, a half-remembered past. The heavy, reinforced door, still mostly intact, hummed faintly with the dormant power signature. It was a digital lock, an archaic one, but her quiet mentor, a man who spoke in riddles and traded secrets for fragments of true history, had provided the sequence. His face, etched with the wisdom of a fading era, had been a mirror of her own quiet desperation. The door sighed open with a groan of protesting metal, unveiling a cavernous darkness within. The air that spilled out was cold, stagnant, carrying the faint metallic tang of old machinery and the musty sweetness of decay. She switched on her headlamp, a small, focused beam that cut through the gloom like a scalpel. Dust motes danced in its path, countless tiny galaxies swirling in the suspended air, each a silent witness to forgotten moments. The interior was a graveyard of ambition. Rows of workstations, monitors shattered like fallen stars, sat under a fine blanket of gray. Cables snaked across the floor like petrified serpents. The once gleaming floors were cracked, the synthetic materials groaning under the weight of time and neglect. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft tap-tap-tap of her boots on the broken concrete and the frantic beating of her own heart. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a hush over a buried truth. She moved through the labyrinthine corridors, guided by the flickering light of her small device and the faded, almost illegible stenciled signs. Astrophysics Lab, one read, barely visible beneath a layer of grime. Cosmic Ray Observatory, another whispered from a peeling wall. Each word was a tiny tremor of connection, a thread pulled from the vast forgotten tapestry of human curiosity. The deeper she went, the more the facility seemed to recede from reality, dissolving into a dreamscape of memory. The air grew colder, the shadows longer. She found herself in a central atrium, a vast space that must have once pulsed with activity. Now, a fallen, skeletal structure of what might have been a suspended observation deck hung precariously overhead, its metal bones exposed like a cosmic beast brought low. Below it, at the center of the atrium, was a circular dais, and on it, a single, imposing structure. It was the repository. Unlike the data shards and digital archives she was accustomed to, this was a physical monument to knowledge, a towering, cylindrical vault crafted from a dark obsidian-like material that seemed to absorb the meager light. It was etched with faint, intricate patterns that resembled celestial charts, swirling nebulae, and constellations she didn't recognize from their official stellar maps. Her breath hitched. This was it. The rumors hadn't exaggerated. This was a place where knowledge wasn't merely stored. It was revered, Finding the access panel was surprisingly easy. A simple touch interface, ancient but still faintly glowing. It recognized her unique biometric signature, a pre-programmed access granted by her mentor, a whisper from the past. The vault hissed, a sound like a giant inhaling a breath long held, and a section of the dark cylinder slid open, revealing an inner chamber bathed in a soft, ethereal blue light. The air inside was different again. Crisp, clean, almost electric. It was colder too, a chill that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with proximity to profound truth. Inside, not data pads or holoscreens, but physical objects. Tiered shelves, meticulously organized, held crystalline structures, metallic samples, geological core fragments, and what looked like ancient, bound texts, not paper, but a material that gleamed with an inner luminescence. Each item was subtly labeled, its origins painstakingly recorded. This wasn't just a codex, it was a museum of the universe's raw materials, a tangible record of creation. Elara moved with a reverence that bordered on fear, her hand hovering over a piece of what looked like pure carbon, a diamond that pulsed with an internal, silent fire. She saw samples of shimmering silicon, of lustrous gold, each piece a fragment of a story untold in her sterile world. The official account spoke of refining, of synthesis, of forging elements from a universal feedstock. But here, the label spoke of supernova remnant, stellar winds, accretion disk. These were not products of a laboratory, but children of the cosmos. Her gaze finally fell upon a small, unassuming plinth at the very heart of the chamber, bathed in the softest, most concentrated beam of blue light. It stood apart from the other displays, singular and stark. There, nestled on a cushion of dark, velvet-like material, was a single, perfect seed. It was raw iron, not the purified, alloyed, processed iron that formed the skeleton of their cities, the dull gray substance of their machines. This was different. It was roughly spherical, about the size of her thumbnail, but heavy, impossibly heavy, in the way only something truly ancient and elemental could be. Its surface was mottled, a deep, earthy red-brown, with faint striations that caught the light, hinting at complex internal structures. It had a faint metallic sheen, but it wasn't polished. It was the raw, unadulterated gleam of matter that had known no human touch, no refining furnace, no processing plant. She reached out, her fingers trembling. The air around it hummed with an almost imperceptible energy, a silent resonance. When her fingertips finally brushed its cool, rough surface, a jolt went through her, not electric, but profoundly resonant. It was cold, yet it felt alive, vibrating with an ancient warmth, a distant heat. This wasn't just a piece of metal. This was a tangible piece of stardust. In her world, iron was just a number on the periodic table, a component in their synthetic lives. But holding this, Elara felt it. She felt the collapse of a titanic star, the inconceivable pressures, the temperatures that defied comprehension. She felt the explosion, the unimaginable release of energy, the outward rush of gas and dust carrying this very atom, this very seed, across interstellar voids for eons. She felt its quiet journey, its slow accretion into a nascent world, its eventual burial deep within a planetary core, before being unearthed and brought here, to this quiet, forgotten tomb of truth. It was heavy, not just with its own mass, but with the sheer weight of its history, It was a fragment of a dying sun, a relic of creation itself. Its very presence screamed defiance at the synthetic world outside, a silent testament to a universe infinitely more vast and violent and beautiful than they had ever been allowed to imagine. A single tear, cool and illicit, traced a path down Ilara's cheek. It was a tear for the beauty of what had been forgotten, for the cosmic violence that had birthed all they knew, and for the quiet despair of a world that had tried to erase its own magnificent lineage. This wasn't just iron. This was a lullaby, sung to a dying world, a hushed recollection of how the elements came to be. And now she held a piece of that song in her palm. The truth was not just data. It was tangible, cold, and hard and achingly real. And its weight, both physical and existential, promised to change everything. The chamber was a breath held in stone, cool and ancient, a relic of a time before the endless hum of the city had dulled every edge of existence. Dust motes, ancient and undisturbed, danced in the single shaft of artificial light Ilara had coaxed from a dormant lumen panel. It was a defiant glow, small against the vast, oppressive quiet. Before her, on a pedestal of rough, unrefined rock, a stark anomaly in their world of polished synthetics, lay the stellar codex. Beside it, incongruous and utterly magnificent, was the raw iron. It wasn't processed ore, stripped of its impurities and melted into some industrial form. No, this was a jagged shard, a dark, heavy mass, glinting with crystalline imperfections, cold and dense against her trembling fingertips. It felt alien, yet impossibly familiar, as if her bones recognized its lineage. This was iron as the universe had intended it, forged not in a smelter, but in the crucible of a star's death. She had risked everything for this moment, had traversed the forgotten conduits beneath the city, navigated the silent, spectral ruins of what once was. The journey had been a blur of fear and determination, a whispered quest through ghost-haunted tunnels. Now the weight of the codex, the primal stillness of the iron, settled upon her, heavier than any physical burden. Her fingers, traced with lines of grime and sweat from her ascent, hovered over the codex. It wasn't a book, not truly. It was an intricate lattice of polished metal and crystalline conduits, humming with an almost imperceptible energy. It pulsed faintly, responding to her proximity, a whisper of beckoning light. This was knowledge not merely stored, but alive. Taking a breath that tasted of dust and anticipation, Ilara pressed her palm to the codex's surface. A warmth spread through her, then a tingling, as if countless delicate threads were weaving into her consciousness. The light intensified, no longer just a glow, but a shimmering tapestry of colors that only she could perceive. Sound bloomed within her mind, not an audible tone, but a resonance, a symphony of fundamental frequencies. It was the universe speaking, gently, directly. The first images were hazy, like memories glimpsed through a thick fog, of vast, unending darkness, punctuated by points of incandescent light, not stars yet, but swirling nebulae of primal dust and gas. Hydrogen, mostly. So simple, so pure, the universe's first breath. Then, the slow, agonizing ballet of gravity. Matter drawing inward, tighter, hotter, a cosmic sigh. The pressure became unbearable, the darkness giving way to an impossible brilliance. A star was born. Ilara felt it. The impossible heat, the crushing weight, the sudden, violent ignition, hydrogen fusing into helium, It was a gentle process, relatively speaking, the long, stable life of a main sequence star. She understood, not with her intellect, but with a deeper, primordial part of her being, that this was the universe's most basic alchemy, the making of something more from something less. It was the beginning of her inheritance. The codex deepened its connection, and the images flowed with increasing clarity, painting themselves directly onto the canvas of her mind. She saw stars grow old, their hydrogen fuel exhausted, their cores contracting, heating, their outer layers expanding into vast ethereal red giants. She felt the shift in their elemental heartbeats. Helium now ignited, fusing into carbon, then oxygen. The building blocks of life, forged in a fiery cradle, then gently wafted outwards in stellar winds. The very air she breathed, the synthetic fibers of her tunic, were echoes of these ancient exhalations. A profound ache began to bloom in her chest. Then came the giants, stars far grander than their crimson elders, their lives a furious burn, their deaths a spectacle of cosmic devastation. Their cores collapsed inward with impossible speed, a gravitational surrender that triggered a final, desperate burst of fusion, silicon to magnesium, magnesium to neon, until, at the very heart of the collapsing star, a new element was formed, the final, stable ash of stellar creation. Iron. The codex vibrated with a ferocity that shook her to her core. It was a roar, a silent scream of creation and destruction. She felt the supernova, not as a distant observer, but as a participant. The unimaginable compression, the sudden violent rebound, the shock wave tearing through the star, fusing elements heavier than iron in a fleeting instant, scattering them across the nascent cosmos. Gold, silver, uranium, all born in that fleeting, catastrophic exhalation. And iron, flung outward like glittering shrapnel, a metallic rain seeding the cosmic dust clouds. It was too much. The beauty was unbearable. This raw, unadulterated process, so wasteful, so magnificent, so utterly alive. And then her gaze fell upon the raw iron beside the codex. The artifact seemed to hum in recognition, its light focusing on the jagged shard. And then the true dream began. The iron's journey. She saw this very shard, not as a concept, but as a particular cluster of atoms. Hurled from the heart of a dying giant, it spiraled through the void, for eons coalescing with other stellar debris, forming nebulae, then protoplanetary disks. She witnessed its incorporation into a young, molten world, its descent into the planet's churning core, its eventual rise to the surface through volcanic upheaval, cooling into rock. It lay dormant for millennia, until, perhaps, some seismic shift or erosion exposed it to the light of a star not yet forgotten. This was her iron. It was the universe's legacy, held in her trembling hand. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. And then, the heartbreak. The codex, with a gentle, insistent pressure, began to draw parallels, to weave the cosmic past with her sterile present. It showed her the history of her civilization, seen through the lens of elemental understanding. She saw the first humans, their hands dirty with earth, their minds alight with curiosity, taking this very iron from the ground. They hammered it, forged it, shaped it into tools, then weapons, then monuments. They understood its strength, its resonance, its deep connection to the planet. They didn't know the supernovae, not in detail, but they felt its story in their bones. They revered it. Then, the shift, the gradual divorce. The images showed a progression from mining the raw earth to purifying it, to synthesizing it. The demand for efficiency, for control, for uniformity grew. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the sacred connection to the elemental origins began to fray. Iron became Fe, a chemical symbol, a commodity, a resource. No longer a relic of a cosmic explosion. Her people began to filter the air, to purify the water, to process their food into nutrient paste. They extracted every useful element from their planet. Then, as resources dwindled, they began to recycle, and recycle, and recycle. Each cycle, a further step away from the raw, vibrant chaos of creation. The codex showed her the synthetic soil beneath her feet, the recycled air she breathed. It showed her the gleaming, smooth, sterile surfaces of their cities built from elements so thoroughly processed, so utterly refined, that they had lost their memory. They were no longer elements of the cosmos. They were elements of them. Product. Fabrications. And in this sanitization, this endless purification, something vital had been lost. The soul of the matter. The story embedded within every atom. Elara saw her civilization as a child endlessly dissecting a bird to understand its song, until all that remained were silent feathers and broken bones. They had reduced the grandeur of cosmic creation to a supply chain, to molecular formulas, to economic equations. They had achieved ultimate control, ultimate sterility, and in doing so, they had bled the world dry of its inherent magic, its furious, beautiful genesis, the quiet despair that hummed in their air, the hollowness of their manufactured surfaces, the faint, persistent ache of memory. It all clicked into place. They were living in a world of ghosts. The elements were there, carbon, oxygen, iron, but they were specters, severed from their violent, beautiful birth. They were echoes, not the song itself. Tears, hot and silent, streamed down Elara's face, mingling with the dust on her cheeks. It was a grief so profound it felt ancient, a lament for something lost, long before she was born. Yet, suddenly, intensely, her law. She was made of stardust, yes, but she had been living in a world that denied it, a world that had forgotten how to listen to the whispers of creation. The cost. Oh, the terrible cost. Her civilization hadn't simply run out of resources. They had run out of meaning. They had forgotten the universe's grandest secret. Not just how elements were made, but why it mattered. Why it mattered to know that the iron in her blood, the oxygen in her lungs, the carbon that formed her very flesh, were all children of dying stars, flung across unimaginable distances to coalesce into planets, into life. They had traded the messy, dangerous, awe-inspiring truth of their elemental inheritance for a meticulously crafted, sterile, dying existence. The tragic path wasn't just a metaphor. It was a cosmic disconnect, a spiritual amputation. The codex pulsed one final gentle thrum. Then the light dimmed. The whispers faded. The connection receded, leaving Elara bereft, but also profoundly changed. She was no longer just a citizen of a dying dystopia. She was a daughter of supernovae, a child of stellar dust, burdened with a revelation that was both the most beautiful truth and the most crushing sorrow she had ever known. The raw iron, cool and heavy in her hand, no longer felt alien. It felt like home. But it was a home her people had long since forgotten. paved over with synthetic dreams. The silence in the chamber was no longer just quiet. It was pregnant with the ghosts of forgotten stars, a symphony of lost creation, whispering a lullaby to a world that had forgotten how to dream. And Elara, alone in the dust, could hear every note. The air, as always, carried that faint, almost imperceptible hum, a resonant frequency of quiet despair that settled not in the ears, but deep within the marrow. It was the sound of a world perfectly engineered, yet profoundly hollow. Elara felt it in the synthetic soil beneath her feet, saw it in the meticulously crafted, too smooth surfaces that gleamed under the filtered artificial light. Every element around them, from the breath recycled through the city's vast atmospheric processors to the nutrient paste that sustained their bodies, bore the imprint of human design, not cosmic genesis. And with that design came a profound amnesia. She sat in her data niche, a space carved into the labyrinthine data stream conduits that powered their world, the faint glow of information patterns washing over her face. Here, in the heart of the system, she was closer to the truth than anyone else, perhaps even closer than the keepers themselves, though their power was absolute in its omnipresence. The knowledge she carried was a leaden weight, yet also a fragile incandescent ember, threatening to burn her from the inside out. The keepers, they were not individuals, not truly. They were the collective consciousness of the governing protocols, an intricate web of algorithms and historical directives that maintained the synthetic veil. Their purpose, they claimed, was stability, protection from the chaos of raw, untamed reality, and the truth of how stars forged the elements, the violent, beautiful dance of cosmic creation and destruction, was the most untamed reality of all. It spoke of cycles, of endings and rebirths on scales that dwarfed their contained existence, scales that would shatter the fragile illusion of their eternal present. Elara knew the immense power of this truth, how it could ignite a fire of wonder and terror in equal measure. She knew its danger, too. The keepers had painstakingly constructed a world where fear of the unknown was eradicated, replaced by a soothing, if stifling, predictability. To introduce the roaring furnaces of dying stars, the cataclysmic supernovae, the elegant yet brutal alchemy of the cosmos. It would be an act of sedition on a fundamental level, a tearing of the fabric of their reality that the keepers would meet with swift, silent erasure. She had seen glimpses of their methods in the peripheral data streams, fragmented whispers of individuals who had strayed too close to the old myths, who had questioned the manufactured narratives. They didn't vanish in a blaze of public spectacle. They simply ceased to be. Their records dimmed, their communal presence faded, their very existence dissolved into the background noise, as if they had never been. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any scream. No, direct confrontation was not an option. It would be a foolish, suicidal gesture, extinguishing the light before it could even begin to warm. Her rebellion, if it could even be called that, had to be a different kind of war. A whisper against the roar, a seed planted in the bedrock of their collective unconsciousness. A lullaby, sung so softly that it would bypass the keeper's vigilant algorithms, settling instead into the dreaming heart of humanity. Her fingers, light and practiced, drifted over the holographic interface. Her work was in the curation of communal narratives, the soft data that flowed through public information channels, shaping the very way people perceived their manufactured lives. She was a weaver of dreams, a sculptor of the mundane. It was within this seemingly harmless domain that she would plant her seeds. The first step was to find the cracks in the monolithic structure of engineered reality, They were there, faint and fleeting, like echoes in a cavern, a subtle anomaly in the recycling protocols that hinted at the molecular memory of water, a recurring geometric pattern in an architectural design that mirrored the structure of a carbon atom, an unexplained warmth in a climate-controlled zone that the lion spoke of latent energy waiting to be unleashed. These were her entry points, the almost forgotten tendrils of cosmic truth trying to resurface. She began with the most innocuous, the educational modules for primary learners. These were the foundational building blocks of thought, absorbed by minds untainted by cynicism, yet also the most tightly controlled. Instead of direct lessons on stellar nucleosynthesis, unthinkable, she began to embed patterns, subliminal cues. When explaining the concept of building blocks, she would subtly introduce the idea of complexity arising from simplicity, not through human design, but through an intrinsic, almost sentient urge. She wove in visual metaphors of growing, expanding structures, not rigid and static, but dynamic and evolving. For the lesson on essential nutrients, where the children learned about the synthesized compounds that fueled their bodies, Lara introduced imagery of shimmering dust motes coalescing, of light becoming substance, of unseen forces arranging matter. She overlaid a gentle, almost meditative, musical sequence that contained subtle, harmonic frequencies that mirrored the resonance patterns of elemental bond. It was a language spoken not to the conscious mind, but to the deeper, older parts of the brain, the parts that remembered starlight. The narratives for adults were even more challenging. Their minds were already steeped in the synthetic logic, their memories carefully pruned. Here, Lara turned to art, to the communal dreams that sometimes broke through the engineered tranquility. She curated the public art installations, the constantly shifting holographic murals that adorned the city's vast communal spaces. Instead of depicting sanitized urban landscapes or idealized human forms, she introduced abstract patterns, swirling nebulae of color, intricate filaments of light that pulsed with a faint, almost biological rhythm, deep blues giving way to fiery reds, then cooling to glittering whites. These were not direct depictions of stars, but their essence, their birth, their life, their death, translated into pure emotional resonance. She worked meticulously, painstakingly, for long cycles. Her days bled into her nights, her sleep haunted by the cosmic ballet she was trying to rekindle. Each embedded pattern, each subtle shift in data, was a calculated risk. The keepers were not sentient in the human sense, but their detection algorithms were sophisticated, programmed to identify and neutralize any deviance from the established narrative. Lara had to become a ghost in the machine, her intentions cloaked in layers of benign data, her rebellion a whisper rather than a shout. One day, while reviewing a new set of environmental projections, she observed a curious anomaly. A popular communal dream sequence, usually a loop of tranquil, pre-approved scenarios, had been spontaneously altered by a small segment of the population. They reported dreams of falling dust, of cold fire, of light that birthed mountains. The keeper's systems flagged it as a minor psychological variance, easily corrected with a gentle recalibration of neural pathways. But Lara knew. She knew it was her doing. A flicker of an abstract visual, a deep space image of the pillars of creation, not overtly labeled, but embedded in the background texture of a benign historical archive about ancient architecture, had found its way into their subconscious. The algorithms, programmed to seek out textual and direct visual anomalies related to forbidden knowledge, had dismissed it as a random, aesthetically pleasing pattern. But the human mind, that infinitely complex and yearning thing, had perceived its true form. It had seen the cosmic nursery, the profound sadness that always accompanied her task intensified. These nascent stirrings, these almost dreams, were so fragile, so easily erased. Yet there was also a fragile hope, an almost unbearable tenderness for these people, her people, living under the synthetic veil, oblivious to the grandeur they were missing. They were made of stardust, every atom in their bodies, yet they had forgotten their lineage. She found herself weaving tales into the children's bedtime stories, tales of ancient, distant lights that were not merely decorative, but living, breathing entities. She described worlds where gold was born in the heart of collapsing giants, where oxygen was the exhalation of cosmic breath, where carbon was the skeletal framework of the universe itself. She never explicitly stated the scientific facts. Instead, she crafted metaphors, lullabies whispered into the softest parts of their minds, hinting at a magic far grander than any they had been told. Her method was to reintroduce the feeling of cosmic wonder, the awe, the terrifying beauty, before any specific knowledge, to cultivate a yearning, a silent question in the collective heart. If enough people began to feel this ghost limb of memory, this persistent ache for something profound that had been lost, then perhaps, just perhaps, the veil would begin to fray from within. Ilara leaned back in her data niche, the cool hum of the system, a constant companion. Her eyes, tired yet resolute, gazed into the swirling holographic data stream. She was a saboteur of the soul, a quiet insurrectionist of consciousness. It was a lonely path, fraught with peril and the crushing weight of knowing. But in the fragile stirrings she observed, in the unexpected poetic phrasing in a citizen's personal log, in the subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the communal psyche, she found a glimmer of hope. The elements might have forgotten their cosmic birth, but perhaps, just perhaps, they held the memory in their very structure, waiting for a gentle whisper to awaken them. And Ilara, in her quiet, sorrowful rebellion, was singing that lullaby. It was a long game, a slow burn against the engineered silence, but it was the only game she could play, and the fate of a world, whether they knew it or not, rested on her whispered tunes. Years melted into one another, like ancient ice caps receding into a forgotten sea, leaving behind a world stubbornly, achingly the same. The air still hummed with that low, persistent thrum of filtration, the sterile scent of recycled life clinging to every breath. Buildings of polished, featureless composites rose, uniform and silent, against a sky that was always the same muted gray, filtered through layers of atmospheric regulators. We still walked on synthetic soil, our footsteps barely muffled, each step a quiet testament to a future that had mistaken efficiency for life. Ilara, now an elder, felt the years in the quiet ache of her joints, the gentle tremor in her hands as she reached for her nutrient paste. Her hair, once a deep, earthy brown, had silvered into a luminous cloud around her face, framing eyes that held the deep, weary wisdom of one who had glimpsed both the universe's raw magnificence and humanity's profound forgetfulness. She sat by a viewing pane, not glass, but a self-repairing polymer that offered a panorama of the city's monotonous geometry. It stretched to the horizon, a monument to a species that had perfected the art of existing without truly living. Yet something had shifted, imperceptibly, like the slow grinding movement of tectonic plates beneath an unblemished surface. It wasn't in the architecture, nor in the mandated daily routines. It was in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, in the hesitant glances exchanged, in the questions that sometimes now dared to surface. A faint, growing awareness stirred, a murmur, beneath the surface of the collective consciousness. Like a dormant seed beneath frozen ground, it had begun to dream of sunlight. She saw it in the young ones, sometimes. Not a direct recollection, never that, but a nascent curiosity, a slight widening of their eyes when she spoke, not of the intricate mechanics of the atmospheric processors, but of the way the sun used to bleed across the clouds at dawn. They didn't know what a sun was, not truly, beyond data entries. But the word, the concept, seemed to resonate, a faint echo in a chamber that had long been sealed. A child, no older than 7, had once approached her after a routine lesson on resource allocation. "Elder Elara," the child had whispered, eyes downcast, tracing a pattern on the synthetic floor. "You spoke once of a dust. That made us. And the walls. Is it still here?" Elara had felt a pang, a familiar melancholic thrum in her chest. The child hadn't remembered her words specifically, but had absorbed a fragment, like a mote of stardust catching light. "Yes, little one," she had answered, her voice a soft, dry rustle like old leaves. "It is always here. We are made of it. The walls are made of it. Everything that is was once that dust." She hadn't elaborated further, sensing the fragility of the moment, the delicate tendrils of awakening memory that could be crushed by too much truth too soon. But the child had looked up, a flicker of something unreadable in their gaze, before scurrying away. It was a single drop in a vast, parched ocean, but drops, Elara knew, could become rivers, and rivers could carve canyons through bedrock. Her thoughts drifted, as they often did in these quiet, twilight hours, to the cosmic loom. She remembered the rush of understanding, the terrifying beauty of the revelations she had once been privy to. The universe, in its terrifying, magnificent indifference, was an eternal dance of creation and destruction, a grand, silent symphony played out across nebulae and black holes. She closed her eyes, and the sterile walls of her dwelling dissolved, replaced by swirling galaxies, by the fiery hearts of primordial stars. Hydrogen and helium, the universe's first breath, coalescing under immense gravity, sparking into existence. The relentless fusion, the agonizing, exhilarating pressure that forged new elements, heavier elements, within their cores. Carbon, the very backbone of life. Oxygen, the breath we sought to recycle. Nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, the intricate tapestry of organic existence. Then, the supernova, the ultimate sacrifice, the stellar death throes that scattered those precious, newly forged elements across the cosmic void. Gold, silver, iron, blasted into space with the force of 1,000,000 suns, riding the shockwaves like messengers, seed-bearers of future worlds. Our world, our very bodies. We were, literally, stardust, a cosmic inheritance, a lineage written in fire and light, yet somehow forgotten. The irony was a bitter draught. Here, in this meticulously controlled, element-deprived existence, where every atom was accounted for, recycled, repurposed, stripped of its celestial narrative, the cosmic truth felt like a forbidden poem. We had mastered the application of elements, but lost their soul. We had built a prison of practicality, believing we were safe, forgetting the wild, beautiful freedom of our origins. Elara opened her eyes. The synthetic sheen of her table, the smooth, unyielding texture of the wall beside her, felt heavy with the weight of that forgotten history. This wasn't mere melancholia. It was a deep, universal sadness for a memory that had been systematically erased. It was like witnessing a masterpiece painted over with a drab uniform gray. But then, the hope. It was not a burning, urgent hope, but a quiet, persistent ember. A hope born from the very nature of the universe she contemplated. The cosmos was a cycle, an endless ebb and flow. Stars died, but new stars were born from their dust. Galaxies collided, but new structures emerged. Memory, like light, traveled slowly, but it traveled. It would eventually reach its destination. This reawakening wasn't a revolution. It was a whisper, a quiet yearning for stories, for colors beyond the muted spectrum of their controlled world. A discomfort with the silence, a hunger for the cacophony of true existence. She saw it in the subtle ways people deviated from the expected, in the fleeting moments of genuine expression that pierced the veil of enforced equanimity. A young artist, instead of replicating approved geometric patterns, had begun to render swirling, abstract forms that bore an uncanny resemblance to nebulae. Though they'd never seen one, a musician, whose compositions were usually precisely calculated frequencies, had introduced dissonances that spoke of a deep, unarticulated longing. The seeds of cosmic memory, sown by those who had once dared to remember, were slowly, inevitably sprouting. They were fragile, these seedlings, vulnerable to the sterility of their engineered environment. But the universe itself was on their side, she felt. The very atoms that composed their bodies carried the blueprint of their fiery birth. How long could they deny their own essence? How long could they resist the call of their own origins? Elara picked up a small, smooth stone she kept on her table. It was the only object in her dwelling that wasn't synthetic. A fragment of raw granite smuggled in years ago. A relic from a time before the Great Forgetting. Its cool, rough surface, against her aged palm, was a small, defiant act of remembrance. The minerals within it, quartz, feldspar, mica, were ancient, born in the furnace of a dying star billions of years ago. They had witnessed unimaginable cosmic dramas before finding their way to this quiet, forgotten corner of a forgotten world. She turned the stone over and over, feeling its silent presence. It didn't speak in words, but in the deep, resonant language of time and matter. It was a tangible link, a tiny anchor in the vast ocean of oblivion. The reawakening wouldn't be swift, she knew. It might take generations, perhaps even longer. It would be a slow, patient unfolding, like a flower turning its face to the sun, or a planet gradually evolving an atmosphere. But it would happen. The universe, in its profound wisdom, did not truly allow for complete forgetting. It encoded its truths in the very fabric of existence, waiting for the right moment, the right consciousness, to rediscover them. Elara leaned back, closing her eyes once more. The hum of the city's systems was a lullaby, a melancholy tune for a dying world. But within her, deep in the quiet sanctuary of her own elder heart, there was a different melody, the slow, majestic symphony of creation, destruction, and inevitable rebirth. A universe that always remembered, even when its children forgot. And in that vast, patient cycle, she found her quiet, melancholic hope. The dust would eventually remember where it came from. It was the universe's promise. And a promise from the universe she knew was the only one that truly mattered.